back reading No Bad Parts by Richard C. Schwartz, Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with the Internal Family Systems. We're on Chapter 10, The Law of Inner Physics. A Beautiful Mind, a movie about the famous mathematician John Nash begins with the viewer not understanding that everything they're seeing is through the eyes of a paranoid part of the main character. It's a wonderful example of what people experience when protectors thoroughly blend. At some point, Nash separates from his paranoid part, Parcher, played by Ed Harris, and along with him, we realize that it's just a part that has taken over his mind. Ignoring Parcher and keeping him at bay helps Nash function, which he does well the rest of his life. For me, this illustrates how helpful mindfulness practices can be. In IFS, we'd take another step. We'd go to Parcher to learn about what he's protecting. At the end of the film, Nash looks at Parcher, who is staring back at him from across a field where he's standing with a bunch of little kids. They all look at Nash forlornly as he moves on with his life and leaves his protectors and exiles in the dust. All of your parts are in there waiting for you. They deserve your love and attention. But before getting close to the parts you're most afraid will overwhelm us with raw or raging emotion, we've learned to ask those parts to not totally flood us, reassuring them that by not overwhelming us, we're more likely to listen and help them. It turns out that whenever a part agrees to not overwhelm, it won't overwhelm. This is one of the laws of inner physics. This law enables you to get close to exiles without becoming them. You might feel some of their feelings and blend with them to a certain degree, but they won't take you out in the way they have in the past when that agreement's in place. And that agreement has never been violated in all the years I've been doing IFS. As it turns out, parts can control how much they overwhelm. This is hard for people to believe because so often when they open the door to their exiles, they become flooded with all those feelings that they don't feel like they have any control over it. The same is true of protectors at times. As we found in some of the exercises, they can totally blend with you such that you see through their eyes and think the way they think. This particular law of inner physics has proven extremely valuable in our work with highly delicate, traumatized, or heavily diagnosed clients who are terrified of being overwhelmed by their parts, particularly their exiles. It allows us to enter such inner systems without using the grounding skills that characterize other trauma approaches. Again, it turns out that all we need to do is ask a part to not overwhelm. If it agrees not to, it won't. Parts overwhelm when they believe, often with good reason, that they have to totally take over or will lock them away again. It's the same with human exiles. If a client becomes overwhelmed, has a panic attack in my office, for example, it's because we hadn't made that agreement with the terrified exile in advance. When that occurs, I don't ask the client to take deep breaths, look into my eyes, or feel their feet on the floor. I simply say something like, I see that a really scared part is here now, and I'd like you to let me talk to it directly. Then, as I talk to the part, I'll let it know that it's very welcome and I'm happy it's been able to break out. I also let it know that it will be a little easier for us to help it if it wouldn't mind separating its energy just a little bit so that my client can be with it too. Most of the time, the panicked part believes me, and suddenly my client feels grounded, accesses their self again, and experiences compassion for the panicked part, and they can be with the part rather than becoming it. If Nash had come to see me for a session and started talking about all the people who were out to get him, I'd ask if I could talk directly to the part that was telling him those terrible things. He might initially protest that it wasn't a part, that it was him, but I can be persistent. If he then let me talk directly to Parcher, I'd ask what he was afraid would happen if he didn't take over, and I'd assure him that if he'd let Nash be with him, we could heal whatever he was protecting inside. It might take several sessions before Parcher trusted me enough to separate, but once he did, Nash would see him rather than be him, and Nash could honor him for his efforts to protect, and we'd be on our way to heal the exile Parcher was trying to deal with. This particular law of inner physics has been invaluable. I'm covering it here in such depth to assure you that if one of your exiles or protectors takes over during an exercise, it's possible to talk them into separating again. There's another related law of inner physics I want to mention here, and you'll find it illustrated in some of the transcribed sessions included in the book. There's nothing inside of you that has any power if you are in self and not afraid of it. This law has also never been proven false in the decades I've been doing this work. And keep in mind that I have worked with clients who have parts that are extremely intimidating and are even determined to hurt or kill them or someone else. And when we do our work together and parts that clients have been afraid of most of their life, parts that feel like actual monsters or demons suddenly can't do anything to them, the part's usual attempts to control or intimidate now seem feeble because the client sees what the part is all about and they see how that part has been stuck in a role. Having said that, it's also important to know that if a person is afraid, these parts often carry nasty burdens and can have a lot of power to make people hurt themselves and others. So being in excuse me, I'm still waking up. So being in self and not overrun with fear is crucial. It's also important to remember that the parts aren't what they seem to be, and if you can stay centered with them, they'll reveal their secret histories of how they were forced to be in these extreme roles. They'll also let you know what they're protecting inside, after which you can help those parts transform too. For me, there's something spiritual about this second inner law. If self is indeed a drop of the divine within, then it makes sense that unblended self wouldn't be intimidated by anything, including apparent evil, in the inner world, and instead would work forcefully, but also lovingly and effectively to heal and transform it. Check-in. At this point, you have encountered nearly all of the exercises in this book. Accordingly, I want to extend some advice or perspective. First of all, if you've gone on any of these suggested journeys, you may find that your inner system is in a bit of turmoil. You've had the courage to test drive out a different and countercultural way of knowing yourself and relating to your parts that can be quite disconcerting at first. This is particularly true if you are alone with it, if the people around you don't understand and have trouble supporting it. I want to honor your courage and remind you how important it is to take care of yourself and your parts as you continue on this journey. This includes being patient with their skeptical or distressed reactions. Be sure to hold lots of inner meetings and discussions and remind your parts of who you are and who you aren't and how much you care for them and can help them. This also means listening to what you can do in the outside world that would help them. That might include more distance from some people and more connections to others. It could mean more time out in nature, practicing yoga and soothing meditation practices, taking Epsom salt baths, or watching the kinds of films or TV shows that your parts like, which may not always be your cup of tea. Generally, if you listen, they'll tell you what would help. When neurophysicist and IFS trainer Frank Anderson does medication evaluations, he has patients ask inside if their meds are helping or not. Their parts will let him know how to adjust the dosage or change the medication itself. I mention these self-care suggestions now because the next exercise can be particularly disconcerting. Advanced protector work. We have a motto that all parts are welcome. That being said, there are some parts that we're more afraid or ashamed of. As you've done in earlier exercises, take a second to get comfortable. If it helps you to take deep breaths or set up as if you're going to meditate, please do that. Okay, let's breathe. start by touching base with the parts you've already been working with. See how they're doing and remind them you're there with them and that you care about them. I believe that you can't grow up in the US or other countries with a long history of racism and not carry that legacy burden, although I do find that people from some countries don't carry it. No matter what your race is, no matter how much anti-racism work you've done, it's still likely that there's a part of you that still carries that burden. I love a story that Desmond Tutu tells about getting on a plane and feeling proud to see that there were 2 black pilots. However, during the flight, there was some technical trouble, and Tutu caught himself worrying that there wasn't a white pilot. That's just to point out that racism is in all of us. And if we respond to that part by shaming it into exile, we just create more implicit racism, which means even more blind spots and keeping the larger system of racism spinning. So that's the part I'm inviting you to look at, the racist, the one who harbors white supremacist beliefs and says nasty things in your head at times. I've done this practice with a lot of people, and I find that even those who honestly aren't aware of their own racism at first will find it if they are patient. I'm not asking you to get close to that racist part, I just want you to notice how you feel toward it. And when another part speaks up, particularly a part that tells you to be ashamed or afraid of your racist part, just let that protector know that letting you get closer to the racist part will actually help it change. And tell them that their exiling approach doesn't really work. For now, it may be enough to acknowledge the racist part's existence and commit to doing more work with someone who can help you. Here are some reminders from the IFS perspective to help. That inner racist is just a part of you. Much of you isn't that way. It's not some unworkable bundle of racism. Like all your other protectors, this part can be unburdened and transformed too. There's no shame in having this part. Racism is a legacy burden that's pervasive in this culture. If you're like me and a number of people I've worked with, the legacy burden permeates many parts, so don't be disappointed if it doesn't totally disappear after you unburden one of them. Eventually you may find that this racist part is a protector, and you need to heal the exile it protects before it will unburden. Or the part might simply be carrying the cultural legacy burden of racism, and it will be more willing to unload it when you let it know that's possible. As usual, when you feel you've reached a stopping place, thank your parts for all they've done and come back to the outside world. Do whatever it takes to ease out of this work and to take care of yourself. My parents were active in the civil rights movement, and I've considered myself active or at least supportive of progressive movements all my life. Yet when I decided to work more directly on issues of racism, I found myself mortified to find a racist part inside of me. I'm not sure why, but it's been one of the toughest parts for me to unburden, and I still get hits of it at times, and have to gently counter that part's impulses and beliefs. It's so young and scared. I think it's the same for a lot of people, and one of my goals here is to depolarize the discussion around racism in order to promote more openness and disclosure about what's really going on inside of us. Until you can unburden your racist parts, it's far better just to be aware of them. If you find one, you can actively remind it in a compassionate way that you know it carries those beliefs, but what it says and thinks isn't right. The problem arises when you go to war against your inner racism. As I've said a number of times in this book, going to war against a part usually just strengthens it. When you exile it and pretend it's not there, usually you're just doing it to feel better about yourself, making it much harder to unburden it and counter the potential harm it might do. I encourage you to use a similar process with other parts you are ashamed of or fear. Maybe the one that gives you embarrassing sexual fantasies, or the one that thinks Donald Trump is great, or the part that secretly delights when your friends fail, or the one who believes that men actually are superior to women. We all have parts we don't want to admit to, even to ourselves. In general, these parts of us are young and misguided in our children. And just like misguided external children, they deserve to receive our guidance and love rather than our scorn, shame, and abandonment. Session 4, Andy. As you might have guessed, I've I'm excited by the possibility that IFS can help unload inner racism as well as the burdens of denial or apathy. Anything that's an obstacle to our appreciating the suffering that systemic racism has caused and acting to counter and repair that damage. I've been experimenting with a number of groups and individuals, and this session is included here to illustrate some of that work. In a recent podcast, Andy, the interviewer, who is white and very involved in anti-racism activities, allowed me to work with his racist parts. Okay. Dick, Andy. Dick. Andy, if you were up for it, it'd be great to work with that part of you that's racist. Andy, I'm open to it. It feels edgy and vulnerable, but I wouldn't be walking the walk if I wasn't open to it. All right, then focus on that part of you that carries racist beliefs and maybe says some racist things in there sometimes, and see if you can find it in or around your body. I think it may be two parts, one that's around my mouth and lips and another one that's hard to find. Okay, let's check in first with the one around your mouth and notice how you feel toward it. He's maybe 5 or 6 and in a particular memory. I feel some compassion toward him. Let him know that and see how he reacts and if he wants you to know more about that scene. The scene is in a restaurant with someone I love and trust very much, and it's the first time I've seen a Black person. I grew up in the suburbs and I lived a sheltered life there, and so I asked this person I was with why that man's skin was dirty. It was just a child's curiosity, but the adult I was with was very embarrassed by that and wrenched away from me and apologized to the Black man and told me not to ask questions like that anymore. And what this part is telling me today is that he still fears how his curiosity might hurt that adult and might hurt people with skin that man's color. Ask if he still lives back in that scene. No, but he still worries that those two people are not okay. Okay, then go back there with him and help him see how they're doing and what they need. Now ask him what he wants you to do back there with him or for him. He just wants those two men to connect, the man he loves and trusts and the Black man. So I'm helping that happen. He's really happy about it. Now it feels complete. Okay, then let's take him out of that scene to a place he'd enjoy and see if he'd like to give up the beliefs and feeling he got from that time. Yes, very much so. Where's he carry all that? It's in his throat. Andy's boy lets it all go out of his throat into the light. The boy feels happy and light and brings courage into his body and the knowledge that adults are hurting too, and he can help adults connect. You mentioned a more elusive one. See if you can find it now. It's kind of hard to describe, but the image that's coming through is of a snake or rope that's coiled around my spine. How do you feel toward it? Kind of scared of it. There's a rule in this work that nothing can hurt you if you're not afraid of it, so see if the scared ones can go to a safe waiting room so we can get to know this snake. Okay, now I feel curious about it. It's letting me know that it's afraid to let me see it. Ask it about that. What's it afraid would happen? It's afraid that a lot of people I love and care about would be hurt and they would hurt us in return. So it feels better to be invisible. That's why it's been coiling up and hiding. Sometimes it thinks things about people based on how they look, the color of their skin, their facial features, and it knows that that is hurtful. Tell it that we're going to help it unload whatever makes it think those things. We're not going to have it say anything hurtful to anybody. This part has been around since I was 13 as a result of having been treated as an exile when I was in middle school because of my weight, my odd interests, who I hung out with, and who wouldn't hang out with me. One defense he developed was to always find a way to feel better than other people. He was really poorly treated for a long time and had to burrow inside. Let him know you're getting this. It makes a lot of sense that he would start judging others just to feel better about himself. The part shows Andy a particular scene in the lunchroom where he and his group of friends were disdained by a popular girl, and he shrank and felt humiliated and angry. Andy enters the scene and helps the boy see that her act had nothing to do with him, and goes and talks to the girl for him. The boy is blown away because he believed that you can't stand up to popular people, and once Andy does that for him, he's ready to leave, and Andy takes him out to the present. See if he's ready now to unload everything he got from those times. Yeah, he's ready. It's hunched in his shoulders and neck. He can't look straight at people and has to turn his head. What does he want to give all that up to? Fire. The boy unloads all that was in his shoulders into the fire, and now it's standing a foot taller. He can see how if he were to act towards someone else the way the girl was to him, he could have that conversation with them and apologize. Watching me do that with the girl was eye-opening for him, he says, and the boy then brings self-confidence into his body and what he describes as the ability to see that girl's pain and how she was trying to feel better by shitting on us. So Andy, tell each of those parts you're going to be checking on them every day for a while and come on back. In this short period of time, Andy met two parts that are relevant to his anti-racism work. The first carried a lot of fear of being curious and open about people of other races, a fear that Andy had to work hard to overcome in his activism. The second part of using racism to feel better about himself in at least I'm better than those people kind of way. In exploring territory like this, I find parts have many different motives for holding on to racism or for not getting involved in countering it. But all the parts I've worked with so far, including my own, are young, stuck in difficult scenes, and relieved when they unburden. Again, here's one central tenet of IFS at work. Going to war against inner beliefs or emotions of any kind will often backfire. Listening and healing them is the better way to go, all while relating to them with firm yet loving self-led discipline until they unburden. In the process of exploring what seem to be your dark sides, you may also encounter something that doesn't seem like a part. We occasionally encounter voices or images that are quite nasty, but they're also more two-dimensional than parts. We call these things unattached burdens because they seem like internalized pieces of hatred or evil that never attach to a part. They're more like free-floating burdens. These are what some psychodynamic systems call introjects. But again, one of the laws of inner physics is that if you're in self and don't fear the part, it has no power over you. Don't fear the part. You have to feel it, just don't fear it. Okay, that's chapter 10. Pretty quick. We have chapter 11, and then we have closing thoughts. And then we're done. So I think I'm probably going to read chapter 11 and closing thoughts together, because closing thoughts is just 2 pages. And I'll do that next time we see ya. Have a good one. Bye.